Even before Future Redeemed released, N was, without a doubt, my favourite character from Xenoblade Chronicles 3. The way he buries his true feelings, his crippling guilt and regret over the perverted imitation of his former self he has become, under layers and layers of affirmative self-lies and justifications, is so fascinating, making him truly one of the greatest antagonists the series has ever produced. Perhaps unlike other villains like Jin and Egil, I think that N, deep down, knows that what he is doing is wrong and does regret his decisions and, to a partial extent, hates the person he's become. But he's too far gone at this point. How could he ever begin to repent for the wicked things he's done? So, he finds himself naturally slipping further and further into villainy. Going into Future Redeemed, I pretty much wasn't expecting anything from his character. I thought I was already satisfied with his characterization in the base game. But then this scene, titled Gondor's Path, played out, and, needless to say, they somehow managed to make N even more interesting and complex. Long story short, I absolutely adore this scene. I think it is likely my favourite from Future Redeemed, which is saying a lot considering some of the crazy shit that goes on at other points, such as Shulk and Rex's return, and the return to Klaus's original world. There is just so much heart and emotion packed into these 5 or so minutes that I felt I wanted to analyse it myself as the second episode of this new scene breakdown series. If you didn't catch the first one and are interested, you can check it out here. It was about Noah and Mio's flute trade. But with that out of the way, let's get to discussing what exactly makes this scene so special. This scene is the culmination of multiple repeated teasers throughout Future Redeemed that showed snippets of what happened in the moments leading up to and during the city's destruction, but never the event in its entirety, until now. That is part of the reason it's so satisfying. We are finally seeing the payoff of one of Future Redeemed's main plotlines that it has been building towards the entire expansion. In this scene, 4 main characters' individual stories come together. First there is Nael, whose hatred of the soldiers of Ionios and the world outside her sheltered city walls has made her the perfect vessel for Alpha, so I guess this actually makes it 5 characters. They plan to take the city's people to a new world, erasing all of the old life across Ionios in the process, including both its soldiers and Mobius. This is what she, or he I guess, was attempting to do on the very same day the city was later destroyed. She comes face to face with N, who is very much the focus of this scene. He has just been tasked with destroying the city and its people by Zed, who used it as a bargaining chip by promising that, in doing so, he would bring back Mio, his beloved, in the form of M. However, Zed's true reason for ordering N to carry out said mission was to eliminate Alpha and the lives of the city he planned to take with him to a new world. Without them, after all, he would have no people with which to construct this new future. The other character who is integral to this scene is Gondor, N's very own son. We first met this character all the way back in Chapter 6 of the base game, being the child N left alone in the forest in that truly heartbreaking sequence of cutscenes that I could very easily make another scene breakdown episode covering. However, we didn't know his name at that point. He has devoted himself to not only living a peaceful life protecting the city and its people, but also at the same time living another life in which he risks his own skin trying to free soldiers outside its protection from the bondage of the flame clock. This, as previously mentioned, is a mentality that Nael despises, which adds yet another element of conflict to this scene, making it all the more juicy. Finally, the other key player in this scene is Matthew, who only arrives at its end, but just in time to see N stabbing Gondor, his grandfather, through the chest, without witnessing any of the earlier context. This results in him viewing N as a one-sided psychopath who killed Gondor for no good reason, and did it willingly, even gladly, which isn't quite the case. Gondor passes down the future to him, claiming it is now in his hands. With that all out of the way, let's get down to discussing the scene itself. Okay, I'm sorry to stall again, but actually I want to address one more thing quickly. Something I've seen people criticise this scene about, which I don't exactly agree with, but can see why people think this way, is that it A, doesn't make sense for N's character. It paints him as a hero who wants to save the world, despite his unapologetic assholery in the main game, and B is a retcon, as we were previously told the purpose of N's assault on the city was to gather the embers required to revive Mio, whereas now it is to defeat Alpha. It's changed. Personally, I think the former statement would only work if N was actually doing this to save the world because he cared about everyone else in it. This is very much not the case. Alpha, in threatening the world as a whole, is also threatening N's endless now with Mio. So he wants to defeat him not because he cares about anyone else's well-being, but selfishly for his own purposes. If the world doesn't exist, neither will anything in it, including him or Mio. He couldn't give less of a shit about anyone else. Next, it could be argued that this scene is somewhat of a retcon, sure, but personally I think it fits well enough with the vague information we were given concerning this event in the base game.
In exchange for the lease on life they would get as Mobius, Zed ordered N to kill the city's people.
All that's changed is that now N's attack on the city has two purposes. To show Zed he was willing to do whatever it takes to bring Mio back and was wholly devoted to Mobius, but also to bring down Alpha in the process. The scene begins with Gondor returning to the city and seeing a strange pillar of light, which he runs towards to investigate. Inside he comes across Nael, surrounded by many of the city's people but also an ominous red mist. She attempts to convince him to join them inside the circle, but is interrupted by N.
You? Are you? Father?
Gondor is stunned to see that his very own father, who was once such a force for change and good, has become Mobius, a force that is the very antithesis of everything he once stood for: stagnation. He calls out to N, asking him why he is doing this.
Why are you doing this?
N is completely unable to respond. He is so ashamed of what he has become and the choices he has made and how he has sided with that which used to be his sworn enemy that he is lost for words. But it is evident that he does feel a degree of regret from the slight breath of air he lets out. It's a brilliant little detail which shows that, at least at this point, N isn't yet completely far gone. Gondor then references how he had once told him to make friends, despite just massacring those very same friends he had made. To rub salt in the wound even further, they replay some of that same scene where Gondor was left in the forest. Stop making me cry, game! Soon, the game does something unique that it hasn't really done before, and actually has you directly play during a flashback, taking on the role of Nael fighting against N. I really like that it does this. By having you play a part in the events themselves, rather than simply being a bystander and just watching this fight play out in a cutscene, it makes you feel more connected to everything that's going on, as if you were actually there yourself and witnessed the event. After the fight though, the scene gets even better. We first get a really slick, insanely well choreographed fight scene between N and Nael, which I'm really glad is here. Xenoblade fight scenes are always something to behold, and they did not disappoint here. It just adds another layer to the excellence of this scene as a whole too. Not only do we have some incredible interactions between N and Gondor, which I will discuss later, but it also features an awesome action scene to keep you hooked and add some more variety. During their clash, Nael/Alpha asks N why he is doing this. His response?
You're just Mobius, but what's his power?
You would never understand. This is my choice!
You can almost hear the attempt at convincing himself that he wanted to do this in his voice and wasn't just being coerced by Zed, which is absolutely brilliantly performed by Harry McIntyre, the GOAT. I also want to commend the voice acting in these lines, it is absolutely superb too.
So you choose to stay in the now, to abandon the future?
The one leaving things behind is you!
N finally gains the upper hand in their battle and is able to knock Nael to the ground. He rushes in to finish her off, but before he can, this happens.
It is done. Alpha.
Leave her!
When I was playing through Future Redeemed for the first time myself and this moment happened, my heart sunk. I don't know what it was, but the realization that N never truly meant to kill his son emotionally wrecked me. Prior to this, I had been grappling with the small annoyance at the back of my mind that the portrayal of N as someone who would willingly, gladly kill his own son was, even for him, too extreme and made him too unlikable. So when I realised that he didn't do it gladly or willingly, it just made me appreciate his character even more and the immense amount of loss he has experienced. However, what I also appreciate is how he doesn't immediately attempt to save Gondor either. He doesn't promptly try to remove his blade and apologise for what he's done. It's almost like the writers are able to achieve a very interesting middle ground in this way, that puts N right in between being too detestable and too sympathetic as a villain. While his murder of Gondor was ultimately an accident, he still committed to it and didn't try to remedy that accident. Instead, he doubles down on his self-deception even further, convincing himself that somehow Gondor actually wanted this to happen.
It was Gondor's choice. I simply cut him down, as he desired.
It's almost as if, otherwise, he simply wouldn't be able to cope with the harrowing truth that he was directly responsible for the death of his own kin. He wouldn't be able to take it. What's also brilliant about this scene is that it shows N is not beyond reach, and fragments of humanity still reside within him. Gondor's questioning of what Mia would think of this causes him to groan, is this a groan? In horror and desperation.
What about Mum?
Additionally, you can actually hear his voice slightly break during this sentence, as if on the verge of tears. His actions are affecting him.
You don't need to know. The burden is mine alone to bear.
Again, I gotta give props to Harry McIntyre's incredible performance as N here. I genuinely think he may be my favourite voice actor in the entire series. He is so insanely talented. Their dialogue continues, with Gondor stating that this is the path he has chosen, likely referring to the path in which he passes down the future to Matthew.
This is the path I have chosen.
N seems to view this as a justification he can use to lie to himself that what he is doing is right, because Gondor actually wanted this to happen. This is evident if we pay closer attention to the fact that, after Gondor voices these lines, N actually drives his sword in deeper into his son's chest. It's a brilliant little detail that I really appreciate. The scene comes to its close with the arrival of Matthew, to who Gondor passes down his legacy and the future of the city's people, stating that it is now in his hands. A huge theme in Future Redeemed, more so than any other game in the series in my opinion, is family, and specifically how family can be used as a way to pass down your own ideals and ambitions to the next generation, even if you aren't personally able to achieve your goals yourself. Gondor is doing just the same thing. Not only is he literally passing on the Ouroboros powers to Matthew, but he is also symbolically passing on the will of the city's people to free the world from the reign of Mobius. Gondor uses his final moments of life to lunge towards Nile, attempting to use the Ouroboros power as a means to separate Alpha from her body. However, this attempt was unsuccessful, and instead separated Alpha's dormant conscience remaining from Ontos's or Alvis's experiences from travelling with Shulk, allowing them to manifest in a separate entity who we know as our lovable A. Surprisingly, it wasn't actually N who destroyed the city in its entirety. While he did indeed massacre many of its inhabitants, the cause of most of its damage was the explosion resulting from the aforementioned separation of A. What I adore about this scene the most is just the emotional value that all of it has. Every character's feelings and emotions are palpable here, and all of their inner conflicts and stories come to the surface in brilliant ways. You can truly feel N's pain and regret as he is coerced to commit such unspeakable acts, in just the same way as how you can feel Gondor's disappointment and despair over the person his own father has become. No character here is black and white, good or evil, other than maybe Alpha, but he gets an exception because he's a heartless machine. And every single one of them is suffering in their own way, even if, to an outsider like Matthew, the situation initially comes across as very one-sided and black and white. On further investigation, it is anything but. I also want to comment on N's presentation in this scene as a whole. I love the almost dead, emotionless, blank look on his face, showing how much being made to view his former lives by Zed and commit such atrocities has broken him. As Glimmer comments on later, the light behind his eyes has long faded. The symbolism of this scene is also superb. I find it brilliant how this, the event that essentially marked the beginning of N's descent into villainy and his true integration into Mobius, is the very same event in which he ends up having to kill the person who is most symbolic of everything he used to represent, Gondor, his son. To become Mobius and discard his former intentions, he slaughters the very personification of those same intentions. He himself had previously passed down his legacy and will to build a brighter future without Mobius to Gondor, and now he must rip that legacy apart with his very own hands to show Zed he is truly committed. It's a horrific perversion of how Gondor, in this very same scene, does the same thing N did to him in the base game's flashback. He hands down his legacy to his child, or in this case grandchild. The only difference is, he sticks firm to that conviction and doesn't return to destroy it later like N does here. That's the difference between the two of them. I also want to discuss the music that plays in this scene, just like how I did with In the Morning Mist in the former Flute Trade scene breakdown video. The track that plays here is titled Life's Fading Flame Holding These Thoughts, and I absolutely love it. It has a brilliant sense of slowly rising tension that steadily builds and builds until the sound is almost thunderous in nature, booming in your ears. The way it aligns with this shot in particular is nothing short of art. It gives me chills every time. To get more into specifics, the track is, once again, another rendition of one of the main motifs, but what I appreciate about this one in particular is the sense of anxiety and panic it is able to create. Feelings that perfectly complement the scene of the city's fall. It's definitely one of my favourite songs in the game, being nothing short of just epic sounding. I hope this video has been able to demonstrate exactly why this scene is such a phenomenal one, as A would say, and why it is actually my favourite from the entirety of Future Redeemed. Just as in the Flute Trade, everything about it is perfect. The music, the dialogue, the cinematography, the voice performances, and so on. Thank you very much for watching, everybody, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye, guys.